Martha Urioste brought Montessori education to Denver.
The value that she brings to the Montessori movement is her absolute unwavering commitment to the child.
Because of Martha's leadership, we have built a community across racial, ethnic, and income lines.
The number of students Martha has impacted is impossible to calculate. It's got to be in the hundreds of thousands.
As strong and enduring as the Rocky Mountains they stood beside, as visionary as the views of the Grand Plains they looked across, the women inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame are trailblazers whose work has improved and enriched our lives. They are teachers, scientists, ranchers, leaders in business, education, religion, and the arts. Women who have been recognized for their many contributions to our state, our country, and the world. I'm Renelda Muse, and these are the stories of great Colorado women.
I, at a very young age, had a hurt, a wound that would be with me forever. I was going to make sure of two things. No child would ever be discriminated against, no child, black, white, Hispanic, or whatever, and that every child who was Hispanic would be able to learn their Spanish language. And frankly, that's what I've done all my life.
She started an elementary school in an incredibly diverse neighborhood with an incredibly diverse population. And she showed how Montessori could work in the public sector for all students.
It was Martha who brought Montessori education to Denver with one elementary school. Now there are 6 Montessori public schools in Denver public schools, and there's one in Jefferson County, and there's one junior high school program.
She is able to see beyond what's directly in front of her and maintain a vision for what could be.
Anybody who is in the Montessori world, anybody who is in Denver education knows Martha Urioste. She is a formidable presence in education in the city and in the county.
When I was a child, we were expected to become good Americans. What that meant was English only.
Growing up in Raton in the 40s, there was a lot of discrimination.
There were times when I would be coming home and there would be children throwing rocks at me, calling me a dirty Mexican, a no good for nothing Mexican.
And her dad would say, well, you know, you have to master something, but you have to be better than anyone else.
He was a well-respected man. He spoke out when he had to. I think I inherited that from my father.
And she listened to my parents' advice, saying that discrimination will always be around, but it's up to us how we decide to handle it. We were told just to go forward in life and do what you needed to do.
Her father died when they were young. She's always seemed to take on a matriarchal kind of a role. She is the oldest of the children of my uncle Leroy, mom, Ellen, and then Uncle Richard.
The 4 of us growing up with mom, dad, and our grandparents, we learned to speak English and Spanish at the same time, oftentimes within the same sentence. It was English and Spanish, and Grandma always used to say, no dejen el español, don't abandon your language. When she left Raton to come to Loretto Heights, she decided to go into education.
My parents wanted me to have a good education. They wanted me to go to a college that was safe. Because I had skipped a grade when I was in the 4th grade, I ended up being enrolled at Loretto Heights College at the age of 16.
She knew that she wanted to pursue a career in education. It was close to the mountains because she liked to ski, and yet at the same time she was still close enough to go home.
My parents had to sacrifice in order for them to be able to send me to Loretto Heights College. It was a prestigious college.
She went from Raton, New Mexico, a very small little mountain town, to Denver.
How can we compare Raton, New Mexico, 10,000 people, with a city like Denver.
If she had stayed in Raton, she wouldn't have been able to touch the lives of as many people as she has.
I began my professional life in 1958 when I was hired to be a first grade teacher at Gilpin Elementary School in Northeast Denver.
She was one of the first Latinas hired as a Denver public school teacher. It was very, very difficult to get a job, no matter how well educated you were, no matter how prepared you were.
So after the first grade, I was assigned to Cole Junior High School to teach Spanish.
Education in Spanish for children of immigrants was unheard of. I mean, it was absolutely unheard of. So as she grew as an educator and someone who fervently believed in education for all kids, she began to marry her background and her grandmother's words with an opportunity to do some good for children who needed to learn English as a second or an additional language.
I did not know how to teach Spanish. While I was there, a foreign language teacher decided that I needed more training, so she sent me to the University of North Carolina in Tucumán, Argentina, so that I could learn to do the audiolingual method in Spanish. When I returned from that training, I was one of the best, and people would come to watch me to teach the audiolingual method.
She also was given an assignment to teach Spanish classes on PBS way back in the 60s.
I was invited to do 32 Hispanic culture lessons on television.
She went on to study to get her master's degree in counseling.
I was going to be trained as a Mexican-American counselor because it was during that time that Denver Public Schools was dealing with the fact that Corky Gonzalez had closed down the schools. All of the kids were walking out that particular day, and so there were some of us who were being trained to become Mexican-American counselors. I was assigned to West High School, and then I had been awarded a grant to work on my PhD in Boulder.
She was becoming more known within the DPS.
Superintendent Brzezinski decided that I would be assigned to North High School. That was a very challenging time because the community had decided that they wanted to get rid of the principal who had been there. During that time, I was working with a group of individuals from the community to see what we could do to help more students to be on grade level so they would not drop out by the time they were in high school.
Martha was already well known and had been asked by DPS to try to stem the dropout rate of Hispanic youth.
The odds were too much against them because they really weren't on grade level by the time they were in the third grade. It was just too late. A friend of mine asked me if I would be interested in going to meet an international Montessori trainer, and I said no. She said, "Martha, you must go. You must go." So when I walked in there, I really didn't want to be there. I just sat down and I thought, well, I'm here. Let me see what happens. There was a Montessori teacher who was told to slowly pull out the little chair from the table, to sit down, to take a mallet, and to begin to use that mallet on the 12 bells, the Montessori bells. I thought, wow, this is really interesting, but why is it taking him such a long time? Hurry up, let's get on with it. And so when he took the mallet and he began to go ding, 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 ding. After the fourth ding, I came to a complete stop. I was feeling emotional. I was thinking to myself, what happened here? Why am I feeling this stillness?
She was overwhelmed with the peacefulness and gentleness of this little exercise and showing children how to ring the bells.
So during the break, I went up to meet Dr. Elizabeth Kaspari. I said, well, what is this Montessori? So she told me about Montessori and how it is that children begin their schooling at the age of 3, 4, and 5.
She became convinced that Montessori would work for her kids, meaning poor Hispanic kids.
That convinced me that this would be the way that children would be able to be on grade level by the time they were in grade 3. I was so excited that I went back to my principal and I said, Lino, I'm leaving. I'm leaving North High School and I'm going to apply for an elementary school position. I was assigned to Mitchell Elementary School in Northeast Denver. It was the toughest school that I had ever been in. So I called my friend, he was an assistant superintendent at the time, and I said, Al, why did you assign me here? I said, I've been with my people in North Denver most of my life. He said, Martha, we know you're going to do a good job. And that was it.
Denver Public Schools were still under the busing order in the mid-'80s, and Mitchell School, which was at that point mostly Black and Latino, was one of the schools that had not desegregated. And Denver was under pressure because it wanted to get out from under the busing order.
And we were told that our schools were out of compliance with the court, that there were children and their parents who did not want to come on a bus to Northeast Denver because Mitchell only had 16% white children in the neighborhood.
They asked Martha what it would take to desegregate Mitchell Elementary School.
I needed to make a decision about what I was going to do to bring more white children, more middle-class children to Northeast Denver. I said Montessori.
I think the greatest example of how a Montessori classroom is different, you might walk into an elementary classroom and there will be 30 children doing 30 different things. And that might sound like it should be chaotic, but it's not chaotic at all. And in fact, what you'll walk into is a productive classroom, a classroom that has a hum that is excited learning. And it's because the students are very focused on whatever work that they've chosen to work on. They're very focused on that.
Maria Montessori was the one who started this type of education back in the early 1900s. She always believed that children needed to be taught in a space that wasn't confining to them.
Versus a traditional classroom where you might have a teacher who is giving a lesson to the entire group. In a Montessori classroom, you will have a teacher giving a lesson to 3 students, while the other 27 are working productively on individual activities, working with the different Montessori materials.
And sure enough, DPS gave her the resources to create a Montessori elementary school.
The struggles of bringing a program like Montessori is that big systems like DPS want to think that every school is doing the same thing.
The only difficulties that I can remember her having were with the Board of Education. They were against it. They did not want that type of education, and yet Martha was convinced that Montessori was the way to go.
At the time when Mitchell started in the mid-'80s, Mitchell was in 5 points. And in the mid-'80s and even into the '90s, the unemployment rate for Black men was about 80%. The area was grim. In order to attract advantaged families to Mitchell, Martha had to create something pretty wonderful. And she did. She managed to recruit 50% advantaged, mostly white, educated parents, and 50% from the neighborhood. And it worked.
What she had was unconditional love. And that was very rare to have somebody connected to the Denver Public Schools who had that kind of kindness and compassion.
She believed all children deserved an equal, fair education.
No matter the demographic, no matter the racial, ethnic, socioeconomic background of the family. And I think it's because she sees the inherent worth and dignity in every child.
She will go to the ends of the earth for children. It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, kids are kids, and they all deserve the same quality education.
She wants Montessori to be available to anyone and everyone who wants it.
And what's important about Mitchell Montessori is that it was one of the first very successful public Montessori elementary schools in the United States and became a place that people could look to as they created their own programs.
So at the end of the 9 years, Irv Moskowitz and the Board of Education said, "You did it. We're out of compliance with the court. You have to leave."
The DPS school board decided to close Mitchell and give the Montessori program to a school on the fringes of DPS, Denison.
We put up a big fight. The community put up a big fight. We lost. We were moved from Mitchell to Denison.
The reason Family Star came about is because Mitchell School was faced with two problems. The first one was that the abandoned 5-plex apartment building right across the street from the school had probably become a crack house.
The crack house situation was very challenging because there was a child who had found the syringe and gone home to her mother. And that's when Honey Niehaus came storming into my office and said, "What are you going to do about it?"
And she looked at me and said, "Honey, what are you and Paul going to do about it?"
It was an eyesore, not only to the children that went to that school, but to the entire community. And she decided that she could do something with that crack house.
But in the meantime, we were all wrestling with a much more difficult problem, and that was that the children of advantaged families were progressing so much faster in Montessori than the kids from the neighborhood. My experience in it was particularly painful because Martha would ask us to visit school.
That's the other beautiful thing about Montessori. A parent can come in and observe a child for 20 minutes.
And somehow I drew the same time to visit Catherine's class as a woman from the projects. And she and I both had 3-year-olds, and we would sit together quietly in one side of the classroom and watch the progression of our daughters as 3-year-olds are learning Montessori. A Montessori classroom is multi-age, so there were 3, 4, and 5-year-olds in this classroom. And the materials were organized so the youngest kids could go over here, and as they progressed through the material, the older kids were on the other side of the classroom. I was very uncomfortable. My daughter, Catherine, was moving around the classroom at a faster pace than her daughter. And finally, I looked at that mom, and there were tears in her eyes. And she whispered to me, "It's not fair. They're only 3 years old." I didn't understand that. These children were all beautiful, and I expected that all 3-year-olds would perform the same. I didn't understand, and this was before the brain research came, where we learned that 90% of brain development happens before the age of 3. So it was about that same time when we were all starting to talk about it that Martha went off to a Montessori conference, and she met a woman named Judy O'Brien, who was internationally recognized trainer of teachers for Montessori aged birth to 3, and came back from that conference and she said to us, "I have the answer. we got to start earlier. And that led from one thing to another. And pretty soon we found that we could maybe get our hands on that building across the street.
So the next thing I know, Martha pulls in her little group and says, there's this crack house across the street. Our children aren't doing as well as the other children from the other parts of the city. So we might give them a head start and go with Montessori birth to 3 and close that crack house and start a program and identify women from the neighborhood who would be willing to take this training.
Martha had started a 501c3 group called Family Star.
Judy Orion had left Houston, Texas to come to Denver to help us. And she said, I had wanted to do this in Houston. I think we can get it done here in Denver.
We opened up our doors January 1991.
I remember going to see that converted crack house once it was completed, and it was amazing.
Probably first month, the center was open. There would be a rock through one double pane of windows every week. And we got graffiti a lot. I remember in the very first summer that we were there, I didn't want the families to arrive seeing graffiti on the buildings, so I would go early. I'd go over at 6 a.m. and paint. One wall in particular, which is on an alley side, was always graffitied. So I would go there early in the morning and paint, and one morning I was there and a police cruiser drove up. This policeman gets out and he says, "Ma'am, what are you doing?" "Well, I'm painting graffiti." "Ma'am, do you think it's safe for you to be here at this hour?" I said, "Yes, I'm perfectly fine." So what we witnessed that happened was, after an initial kind of response to our being open with the rocks and the graffiti, that gradually diminished because there were many, many neighborhood people involved in the project, either working there or they or someone they knew were sending their children there. So gradually it became a neighborhood institution serving the people of that Northeast community.
Sure enough, the neighborhood children who went to Family Star, and when they graduated at age 3 and walked across the street to Mitchell School, everybody noticed, the faculty, Martha, parents, that the kids from the neighborhood who had had the experience of at least 2 years at Family Star did just fine, and the gap was closed.
We see a child for what their potential is, not just for perhaps the behavior in front of us.
It instills pride, it instills confidence, and it instills responsibility. And those were 3 aspects that Maria Montessori truly believed in. And of course, Martha has come to keep it going.
And so what it is Montessori education, which begins at 0 to 3 and 3 to 6. That's what Family Star is. We have one in Northeast Denver now and one in Northwest Denver. We have 2 Family Stars.
What I've learned from Martha is she's always wanted to be on the cutting edge of what's going on in the field, the research, the leadership, and she uses that knowledge to then do the good work that she does.
Martha is always real strong. She never was out of work. She never left school. And you know, she worked 7 days a week. And so after she had retired, she got cancer of the stomach.
A few years ago, Martha was sick and very seriously sick. And she called me up and she says, "I've got cancer. I don't know yet what the prognosis is, but I'm going to take the time this summer to get well."
She went in for surgery. They were able to remove the tumor. But again, as a testament to her strength and her resilience, she never suffered any type of a side effect. She knew she had to do it, She would get her treatment, her radiation treatment, she'd take her pills and think nothing about it and go on with her life.
As always, she persevered. She took to the mat and she won.
Martha doesn't see anything as too hard.
As an educator at Martha, it's fierce. If there's something that needs to be fought for, she's front and center, she's there, she's in it.
She was always able to hold her cool, but she never gave up fighting for it.
She is small of stature and mighty in her commitment to children.
A lot of doors have been opened for us by people like Martha.
I watched her and observed her talking with students as well as teachers, and there was no difference. She had this ultimate respect for anybody, and she knew how to listen.
Her reach has been so wide and so deep in the Denver area, and through that, she has impacted so many children and families in such a positive way.
The number of students Martha has impacted is impossible to calculate. If you think all the years she's been a public school principal, all the years she's supported educational programs, both in the school she's working in, it's got to be in the hundreds of thousands.
On top of everything that she's done for education, she's just an awesome lady.